All right. When we come back after this, we're going to be joined by Ben Landry, Ocean Harvesters. We're going to begin our discussion on the Menhaden, the pogie industry, and a huge controversy that has been sparked. We'll be back to talk to him, and if you've got any comments or questions, we welcome on our Oakland Heart Jewelers Talk and Text line, which is 504-260-1870. We're back right after this timeout.
Glad you have
a discussion on the Menhaden industry. People who listen regularly to my Saturday morning outdoor show are very familiar with this issue, but a lot of you probably are not. And in an effort to educate the public and make them aware of the issues and understand the industry and what goes on, and because it will be coming up, I'm sure, in the legislature this year. And joining us to help us understand the industry is the Vice President of Public Affairs with Ocean Harvesters, Ben Landry. Ben, thanks for taking some time to chat with us this morning.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Don.
If you would, tell us about your company, Ocean Harvesters.
Sure. So Ocean Harvesters is an American-owned business that harvests menhaden both on the Atlantic coast and the Gulf. And we deliver those menhaden to a company called Omega Protein, where they make high-protein fish meal that is in most pet diets and aquaculture for salmon, and fish oil, which also serves those two industries, but also human health.
Tell us exactly, what is a pogie or menhaden? One and the same, right? Just different names.
Exactly. So it's a very small fish. It's very bony. It's very oily, so you wouldn't want to eat it, although I guess you could. So it's not necessarily prized by recreational anglers, but because of the oil, it's highly prized. And once you make fish meal and oil, it's a commodity traded on the global market. Also, it's used as bait for recreational fishermen, crawfishers, crab pots. So it's a pretty diverse fish.
Tell me, how would you spend a day on a boat? Tell me how the operation takes place to harvest the menhaden.
Right. So the boats typically leave out on a Sunday evening. The captain will determine where they have spotted menhaden in the Gulf the previous day. So we have airplanes that help spot pogie schools. And the vessels leave out on Sunday so that when the sun rises on Monday morning, the boats are there on the fishing grounds. And you've seen the boats. They're blue. They're either blue and white or blue and yellow, depending on the company. And the most important thing, though, is that vessel's not a fishing vessel. There's actually two smaller purse seine boats, which are about 40 feet in length, and they actually surround the menhaden school. And then the mothership, the big blue ship, goes over and takes them out of the water. So it's a little different. A lot of your audience is probably familiar with shrimpers, which are trawlers. This is a purse seine operation, so it's a different fishing method.
You described it very accurately. All right, here's some background information and some facts on how we got where we are today and what goes on in the now recently named Gulf of America, which was formerly the Gulf of Mexico. In Florida, it's totally banned in state waters. They don't allow it. Alabama, same thing, total ban in state waters. Now, Mississippi has a 1 mile buffer, and that includes a mile from its barrier islands where it's prohibited to come any closer than that. Texas has a half-mile buffer along its coast and a 1 mile buffer around jetty and passes. Plus, they put in a total allowable catch limit. I believe it's 31.5 million pounds. Now, here in Louisiana, we had a deal that was hammered out last year after a lot of gnashing of teeth and wailing of tears. They had a deal and a half-mile buffer for one season. And they also had a half mile across the coast, but it was 3 miles off Grand Isle and 1 mile off Holly Beach. And now your industry has pushed for a notice of intent to draw it in 1/4 mile, which the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Commission, in a 4-3 vote, agreed with you to allow that to move in closer. And there's been some opposition to that. What is your argument, Ben, the industry, and if not, I don't know if you can speak for the whole industry, but for at least ocean harvesters, and I'm going to have to ask you to wait till after this traffic report to do that for us. Tell us why the industry felt the need and the right to move in after making a half-mile deal to a quarter-mile. We'll do that with Ben Landry right after we take this quick time out for traffic. Here's Joe Cardarsi in the WWL Traffic Center. Discussing the Menhaden issue, the pogie boats, and we have Ben Landry, the Vice President of Public Affairs with Ocean Harvesters, one of the companies that harvest and fish for the pogies off the Louisiana coast. And Ben, I had posed a question to you just before, and for listeners that weren't tuned in there, Florida bans it completely in their waters, so does Alabama. Mississippi has a 1 mile buffer, including off their islands. Texas has set a limit. They also have a 1 mile buffer around their jetty and passes and a half-mile coast-wide. Here in Louisiana, we're the most generous state when it comes to giving up pogies. We have a half a mile across the coast, 3 miles on Grand Isle only, and 1 off Holly Beach. You and the rest of the industry appealed to the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries to move it in closer to a quarter mile. What is your argument for justifying that?
Well, thank you for that opportunity. Listen, I would say, and your audience knows this, the Louisiana coast is different, obviously, than Florida, than Gulf Shores, than Biloxi. It's a working coast, and there are significant buffers around those identified tourist areas in Grand Isle, Fouchon, and again in Holly Beach. So Louisiana's coast is simply different. So that's why the buffer is a little different. As it relates to, I guess, when you had teed up the agreement, it was never going to be in perpetuity. The agreement was always set for a couple of years until the $1 million taxpayer-funded bycatch survey, and then there was going to be a revisit of these buffers. And that bycatch survey came back and showed that the unintentional catch of red drum and speckled trout were far less than I think a lot of regulators had thought. So we went to the Wildlife and Fisheries Commission and worked with them. I believe they developed this map. And again, just to be clear for your audience, the move from a half mile to a quarter is not coast-wide. I can't stress that enough to your audience. It is roughly a third of all linear miles of the state of Louisiana. So the overwhelming majority of the state will not be impacted at all. So I feel some of the rhetoric on this has been, it is not going to that length to explain exactly how the buffer is being adjusted.
All right. Well, obviously this is going to go before the state legislature, and a couple of legislators and members of that Wildlife and Fishery Commission, by their own admission, said they have an overwhelming number of opponents for a variety of reasons. You know, the coastal restoration, destruction, and the increase on the bycatch, and with regard to the legislative session and the questions that have come up, a lot of questions have been raised about the amount of campaign contributions made by your industry. Can you tell our listeners how much you have given to political campaigns over the last couple of years?
Well, I assure you it's a fraction of what some members of the recreational fishing community has given. I will say that I can't speak to the arguments that recreational anglers are giving to legislators, but I can say, in my opinion, this is a user conflict. It's far less about damage to coastal restoration. I don't think, if you talk to the folks over at CPRA, I don't think they flag Menhaden vessels as a significant cause of coastal erosion.
Well, I've seen it. I've seen it in person. I've been out there and
but
seen.
I would also say that, to me, it is a user conflict. We should be able to share the Gulf of America between different user groups, between the recreational fishing community and commercial fishing industries. We should be able to share it. That those nearshore waters should not be only for one sector.
All right, civil restitution. Why is there no civil restitution on the bycatch for commercial fisheries of Menhaden when every other species has that? Where if someone destroys a resource, fish or game or bird or whatever, they have to pay back for it. It's a payback. It's a restitution. There's no restitution being paid. Would you agree to that? your industry?
No, not at all.
Why not?
Think it's the nature, because I think it's the nature of commercial fisheries. I will say this, Don, your suggestion of civil restitution would shut down the Menhaden industry. I mean, you would have roughly 800 direct jobs, 2,000 indirect jobs in the state, $62 million in vendor pay would be eliminated if no other species could be harvested. It's just simply how this industry
it's called bycatch. But if I say this is bycatch, this fish that you caught me with, I still have to pay restitution. It's only fair that anyone that does that has to pay it back. And it's not being done. It's being lost. And as far as the amount that we would lose economically, recreational fishing far, far outweighs it in what it brings.
I hope that you're not suggesting that this industry should go away. I'm simply saying that as it relates to bycatch, 97% of speckled trout are killed by rod and reel anglers. 96% of red drum are killed by recreational anglers. If we're worried about red drum and speckled trout deaths, it's awful hypocritical to point at another fishery when the overwhelming majority.
There's some very tight regulations with regard to red drum for recreational fishermen. I mean, they've banned the spawning fish, which is the ones that are basically caught as bycatch by the Menhaden industry. And, there's very tight regulations. There's slot limits, and there's a lot of catch and release that's required, and civil restitution payback if somebody, catches them illegally or has an illegal size. Ben, I wish we could continue with you, but I got to go. I got other people coming on, and we're late for traffic already. I appreciate you coming on.
All right, thanks, Don. And listen, if you can...
Go ahead.
If you want more information about this, you can go to lamenhaden.org.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Quite welcome. All right, let's go to traffic. Joe Cardosi standing by, taking a look at the highways and byways. What's it look like, Joe? All right, we come back after this. We're going to continue our conversation about the Menhaden industry. State Representative Joe Orgeron is going to join us. He's from District 54. He was very heavily involved in that deal that was made, and he will be talking about it in the legislature because he is on the Natural Resources and Environment Committee. We'll be right back with Joe after this on WWL.
Don Dubuc on.
And we continue our discussion on the Menhaden industry. Again, the issue, if you're just joining us, Louisiana had made a deal with the industry and the conservation organizations for a half-mile buffer on most of the coast, 3 miles off Grand Isle, and 1 mile off Holly Beach. No limit, no season dates. They could do it for the entire season if they wanted to. Of course, it is a limited season, but in opposition to that, the Florida and Alabama totally banned the Menhaden fishing in the state waters. Mississippi's a mile off, and Texas has a limit when 131.5 million pounds is caught that shuts down, and they have a half-mile buffer across the whole coast and a further buffer, 1 mile, close to the jetties and passes. The industry went before the commission and asked to move it 1/4 mile offshore to move it in. There's been a lot of opposition. You'll hear the reasons why when we get Brad Trascher and Chris Macaluso, the directors of some conservation organizations, on why that is not a good idea, why they are opposed to it. The commission voted 4-3. The commission chairman, Segrera, broke the tie. It was a 3-3 tie. He made it 4-3. There are some state ethics charges a complaint that's been filed against 2 of the commissioners, and I'll get into that a little bit later on because they have conflicts of interest in it. And I invited commissioners on both sides of the issues to come on this. They're the ones that voted for it and voted against it. They declined or did not respond. I've also invited the governor who appointed them to come on and give his opinion, and we have not heard back from him. But we have heard from Representative Joe Orgeron, who is heavily involved in this issue. And I'm getting some text messages in from a lot of you that's saying Ben Landry kind of dodged the question when I asked him about political campaign contributions. So I'll give that information out because I do have it. his organization, Ocean Harvesters, donated $74,500. Daybrook Fishery, they were a lightweight. They donated $45,455. Francois Cattell, who I tried to get, but he was out of the country, he individually donated $68,209.70. Omega Protein, they donated $185,500, and West Bank Fishing, which is Francois Cattell's organization, donated a whopping $408,340. So the grand total was $782,004 made by the Menhaden industry, and that's the ones I have records of. There could have been some smaller donations I don't have. Representative Orgeron, is that a big contribution to campaigns? What do you think?
That is a huge contribution. I could say I have not received any money from Francois and West Bank, and I think I got one accidental check from Ben Landry, and I called them asking him if he wanted me to return it back.
It was accidental.
I think because I'm the legislator that's known for holding them to account and trying to instill some common sense regulations for this industrial fishery.
Well, I saw your appearance and your testimony you gave at the commission meeting. You were upset because you were involved in that deal that was made last year. Tell me how that came down. If I remember right, the commission said, look, the conservation organizations and the industry, y'all sit down and reach an agreement and bring it before the legislature and have it settled out. And I think that's how it came out, right? That was supposed to be a deal. Now, Ben says it was only temporary, but I think was it just a temporary arrangement, or was it?
No, I do not remember it being temporary. As a matter of fact, I was not actually at the deal making. Whenever you talk with CCA, I think they were there with the industry. I'm going to rewind the clock back. I had tried to run a bill to put a 1 mile buffer, and they told me in order to get it through, you would have to compromise the half mile. I compromised the half mile, and even that got killed in the Senate Natural Resources Committee. Subsequently, the industry put a bunch of dead fish on Holly Beach, if you remember that incident. And that is whenever the commission said, we need to push y'all back to 1 mile buffer. And then the governor got elected, made some appointments to the commission, and all of a sudden the 1 mile buffer plan or notice of intent at that time then started to change and morph into, we're going to have a compromise and it'll be a half mile, and that's something everybody could live with. And I do remember waiting on the bycatch study, that being stated, but I don't remember any time, any time limit on it. So.
All right, Joe, I'm got to take a traffic break here. When we come back, I got a couple more questions about you, especially where do you think this is headed? Because it is going to get before the legislature again. We're talking with State Representative Joe Orgeron about the Menhaden issue. We'll be back to do that. But first, let's get a look at that traffic. And we've got Joe Cardosi standing by. Another Joe. What's it look like, Joe? Representative Joe Orgeron, we're talking about the Menhaden issue, and Joe, this is going to get in the legislature for sure. It'll come up under natural resources. How do you think it's going to go? Where's this headed? I've talked to people. I hear from people that want to go the route of Florida and Alabama and totally ban it, or they want to move it 3 miles off. They want to shorten the season. They might want to put a total catch limit on it. Do you think there's going to be a compromise, or do you think this thing with that $782,000 worth of campaign contributions is going to fly through as sent by the commission?
Yeah, I would think that the last commission meeting, that 3-3 tie with the chairman breaking the tie, should be an indicator for anybody in the political realm that the political fix is in, and they're going to try to jam that through. But I personally see the next stop is definitely a legislative oversight for the NOI to see whether or not that goes in, and then subsequently another bite at the apple for the legislative session to put in new regulations and there likely will be new regulations trying to once again instilling some common sense regulation, and now using the bycatch study, the data from the bycatch study. I know Ben spoke as if they see it as it's not as bad as you thought it was going to be, but what it does show is a distinctive curve that at that commission meeting, if you were there, you saw Dr. Scott Rayborn, who was the chief principal investigator. He talked about the 22-foot S-curve, the 22-foot inflection point, and basically what that is over the 1 year that they did our waters, those boats using those Menhadens, our $1 million of tax dollars, we now have basically what's a water depth deep enough for them to fish in where they can still catch Menhaden but not affect the red drum species, and then anything shallower that where they're catching more Menhaden but they're disproportionately affecting the red drum. And I think that's going to come into play in some of the legislation in the future.
Well, we'll try to stay on top of it, and please keep us advised of what's going on legislatively wise, and we'll be watching it. When do you guys go in session?
We go in session on March 9th, but I think the timing of the NOI that's now in public comment section, whatever the public comments in, I believe in mid to late January, usually about 8 to 10 days after that, Wildlife and Fisheries will pull together all those results from the comment and send a report to the legislature, to the Natural Resources, and that kicks off a 30-day time period for us to have a meeting explicitly about that NOI, and that'll probably be the next stop. But people should definitely be writing comments to Wildlife and Fisheries about how they don't believe that reducing the buffer zones are a good.
Thank you, Joe. We got to go. We'll stay in touch.
Thank you, Don. Have a great day.
You too.
I like that idea.
All right, Ian. Thank you, my friend. All right, let's bring in a couple of special guests to continue our conversation on this Menhaden issue. I have Brad Trascher from Louisiana Coastal Conservation Association and Chris Macaluso, better known as CMAC, from the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. He is the fisheries director. Hey, guys, thanks for joining in with us this morning.
Thanks, Don. Thank you, Don.
If you would, let's let our listeners know, since this is not the outdoor show, we've got a lot of people who are not familiar with the issue, who I hope are getting some information this morning and are not familiar with your organizations. Rad, tell us about the Louisiana Coastal Conservation Association.
So the Louisiana chapter of the Coastal Conservation Association is part of a national group, but everything that we do in the state is dictated by state board of directors. Unlike the Menhaden industry, everything we raise here stays in the state here and is spent here in the state. And so we represent conservationists and anglers. We have over 25,000 members in the state. But frankly, we're the voice for the 400,000 recreational anglers here in the state.
And Chris Macaluso, would you explain your role and what the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership is all about?
Sure, Don. Thanks a lot for having us. TRCP is a national conservation organization. We work with CCA, we work with Ducks Unlimited, several other organizations to advocate for giving Americans quality places to hunt and fish. And we advocate for good, science-based, reasonable conservation measures when it comes to managing our fisheries, and that's the kind of stuff that I work on a national level.
I hope you both were tuned in and got to listen to my conversation with Ben Landry and Joe Orgeron, and I think the listeners now familiar with what's going on. They are arguing that they should be allowed to come in closer to the coast than the deal that was made last year. Red, I guess it was David Cresson, who you succeeded as the director of the chapter. He sat in that meeting. Were you in that meeting where you were told to go in with the industry and y'all come back with a plan? They basically just threw it in your laps.
Well, we were all part of those discussions, and, for those that kept saying we're not willing, we met with the industry many, many, many times, and frankly, there was not a compromise to be reached. And then, as Joe alluded to, once the administration changes, they offered a deal and basically said take it or leave it, and The industry didn't like it, and neither did we, and we joined it. But no, it had no expiration date on it. Yes, we wanted to see the bycatch study, but frankly, Don, as I think you alluded to earlier, I mean, these guys, look, I like Ben. I saw him Saturday at a Christmas function, but they're kind of the masters of misinformation. I mean, that bycatch study didn't exonerate them. Frankly, it went the other way. It confirmed everything that we assumed. And so no, I was not in the room when the deal was handed down, but I know all the context, and it was not a temporary fix.
Well, besides the study and the bycatch, which is very extremely important, there's a lot of other issues that come up in opposition to what they're asking for. Chris Seamack, you and I were out fishing. We witnessed coastal restoration destruction and moving in closer to the coast with, he called them boats, they're actually ships. Talk about the damage that it does to what we're trying to reverse in coastal restoration.
Well, Don, you make a good point. I mean, Ben Landry earlier brought up the user conflicts. They look at these user conflicts as if recreational fishermen are out there trying to pick a fight. That is not what's happening. The user conflicts are because these massive 140, 150, 160-foot boats are getting right on top of our beaches. They're getting in water that's shallower than the draft of the boats, and you can watch, and you and I watched it, and so many other people in our state have seen those boats go into that shallow water, chew up that surf zone, set those massive per se nets that they use that are a football field in diameter or more, kill everything that net ensnares, and then dump what doesn't fit into the boat or what they can't keep over the side dead on our beaches. This idea that Louisiana is different than these other Gulf states, that this is a working coast, we appreciate that. But that does not mean that foreign-owned companies get to come in here with impunity and dump their waste all over our beaches and destroy our surf zones. This whole idea behind putting a buffer there was not about user conflicts. It was about creating an area where you have, some protection from these beaches that we've invested billions and billions of dollars in restoring here in the last 20 to 30 years, protecting those beaches from the damage caused by these massive ships that are coming in here and catching everything and dumping that stuff on our beaches.
Well, not only did we witness it, we captured it on video. In fact, it's on my website. We've been running it on the Bayou Wild Facebook page. We've gotten so many hits on it and views. It's incredible. And that was actually in violation of the law that was present at that time. And now they're asking to make what we witnessed and saw legal. There's also been a lot of violations coming inside the buffer that have been recorded, and net accidents where they get so many fish in there they can't get them up, the nets tear, the fish are thrown off and wasted. Talk about those net accidents. I know they reported a lot of them to the CCA, and some of your members got involved in that, Rad.
Yeah, I mean, look, the net tears were a big issue, and, they're now saying that, we've changed the nets, and so we don't have the net tears. Well, frankly, I mean, yes, was a waste of our resource, but frankly, it really just shed the light what was in the nets. And so to me, just because they don't have net tears does not mean they're not still killing the exact same amount of fish. Plus, in addition to the change in nets, they were pushed out some. They were pushed to a half a mile. They were pushed into deeper waters. And so, frankly, it reduced the net tears on its own. So, I think the net tears help shine a light on this. And frankly, it was self-inflicted by the industry. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change what they're doing to our coast or to our fishery.
I brought up the issue of restitution, which I think it's fair. I mean, if you or I or even Ben, if he's out as a recreational fisherman and for some reason he's got an illegal fish and he's caught with it, not only will he pay a criminal fine, you also have to pay a civil restitution, fees that are affixed on every species of fish, bird, and game that we have in the state that you have to pay back. They pay nothing back. They just say, it was bycatch. If I get a fish and I tell the game warden, that was just bycatch, guess what? I'm going to pay when I go to court. Why shouldn't we have civil restitution? And the calculations are there on how much it would cost. And as he mentioned, that would shut the industry down. But at what cost to us?
Well, Don, I think you bring up a great point, and the industry has used the results of that bycatch study, which showed, by the way, they conducted that study in 2024. They had a relatively low harvest that year, even though it was in line with some other years that they've had, because of hurricanes and things like that impeded them from being able to get out a lot. But that study showed they're killing 30,000 plus redfish a year. They're killing 240,000 plus speckled trout a year. They're killing 80 plus million croakers a year, in addition to the pogies that they're catching. It is literally illegal by statute for other people to kill those fish in the manner in which the industry is killing, especially the speckled trout and redfish. You, by statute in Louisiana, cannot kill a speckled trout for commercial purposes with a net. You cannot kill. Nobody anymore can harvest those oversized redfish, and you cannot kill those redfish for commercial purposes. They are a game fish. So everything that they're doing is literally illegal for everyone else, but they look at it as just part of the deal. And they think that the numbers that came out of that bycatch study somehow exonerate them or forgive them for the impact that they're having on the resource. And I think it's the exact opposite. Those numbers are eye-popping. And when that catch goes up, as it did in 2025, let's keep in mind that this year, with the buffers in place, they're going to harvest 100 million pounds or more menhaden this year than they did in 2024. All of that, those bycatch numbers go up as well. So this does not exonerate them. This does not forgive them for the impact that they're making on this resource.
Did either of you garner from that study the impact to the fish populations from taking away its major food source? The straight catching the fish and killing them and throwing them over as bycatch, that certainly has a toll. But what about the fish that don't have any food, that they don't eat, and they're not healthy enough to reproduce? Because the pogies are a very important part of the food chain.
Well, Don, it's silly that the industry actually quotes a study that says that no fish really eat pogie. And come to find out, it was a study out of one of the universities in Mississippi that was studying fish in Tampa Bay, and that's where they didn't eat pogie. Well, because they're not producing the amount of pogie we are, right? And so, that is one of the things I'm talking about of misinformation. Yeah, they come out and quote this study, and it's done by respectable scientists, but it's not applicable here. The same thing as they talk about jobs and foreign companies versus American companies. The way they talk about American companies, that's only the boats. And then he says 800 direct jobs. So is he telling us that there's 30 people on every boat? I don't buy that. They're picking and choosing their data to make their point, and frankly, it's just not true.
All right, guys.
I'll follow up, if you don't mind. I'd like to follow that up a little bit. The bycatch study did not go into the needs of speckled trout and redfish and tarpon and other things, but the University of Florida and NOAA, the federal agency that governs our fisheries, did a study to show how much redfish, speckled trout, tarpon, jacks, et cetera, in the Gulf need to eat menhaden. And it said that the amount of menhaden being harvested right now in the Gulf needs to come down at least 20% to match the dietary needs of speckled trout and redfish if we want to have sustainable large populations of speckled trout and redfish. That's science that's out there. The industry has disputed that science to a certain extent and said that in order for us to set limits based on that science, which is the best available science we have, that it's going to take at least a decade. In the meanwhile, they've gone out and paid for their own studies that Rad just referenced that say that these fish don't eat the menhaden. It's laughable at times to have to deal with some of the rhetoric that comes out of their side.
Well, to say that fish don't eat pogies, they've never put a pogie on a hook and threw it out in salt water, because let me tell you, it'll end up with a fish, and there's some reason why the bait manufacturing, artificial bait, are fashioned to look like pokies because the fish definitely eat them. Look, guys, we got to take a break. When we come back, I want to continue the conversation, talk a little bit about what went on with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Commission at their meeting, because they agreed with the industry that this should go forward and allow them to move in a quarter mile from the half mile, and also what you think is going to happen in the legislature when it gets there. We're talking with CMAC, Chris Macaluso of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. He's the fisheries director and the director of the Louisiana State Chapter of the Coastal Conservation Association, Rad Trascher. And if we can get to some of your text messages, I'll share that with the audience. Keep them coming at 504-260-1870. Don Dubuc in for Tommy Tucker on a Wednesday morning on the Big 870 WWL. We're joined this hour by Chris Macaluso of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. He is the fisheries director and also the executive director of the CCA Louisiana chapter. That is the Coastal Conservation Association, Rad Trascher. I have a comment in from one of our listeners who said, please address the fact that the bycatch study was conducted on harvest from 1/2 mile out, did not include the close-in waters between a quarter and a half, that they want now to fish where common sense would tell you that bycatch is higher. This is not science-driven management. Chris, your thoughts on that?
Donnie's right. I mean, we had a buffer in place when that bycatch study was conducted. We don't know how much bycatch there is between a quarter and a half mile, but we do know this, that the closer they get to the beach, the shallower the water they fish, the more speckled trout, redfish, and other fish like croakers they catch, the more their boats directly damage the water bottom and the more the nets scrape the water bottom. And the fact is that purse seine nets, the reason why purse seine nets are utilized in most of the world is because they don't touch the water bottom, they don't disturb the habitat. That's the reason that fishery gets that clean certification that the Menhaden industry waves around and says, look, our industry's clean, we're certified. Well, they're certified on the predication that those nets are not dragging the bottom. The shallower the water they get, the more the nets drag the bottom, the more redfish, speckled trout, crab, shrimp, mullet, croakers, the more the bycatch goes up, the more damage they do.
And I couldn't agree more, Don. But one other clarification I want to make that you had alluded to before the break was the bait part of it. You are right. We all know that is the candy for trout and redfish. But I also want to make sure your listeners know the bait license and the bait that we use, as well as the crawfishermen and everybody else that uses bait that are made of pogie, does not come from these two companies. That is a third permit holder, and it is minuscule compared to these two industries. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that what we're talking about is not driving the price of crawfish up. It is totally different industry.
That commission meeting where they voted to proceed and approve the notice of intent to move it to a quarter mile, one of the commissioners who denied to come on, he declined, Jonathan Walker, said he received what he called overwhelming comments, like 874, and because of that, he had to vote no. Red, you got 25,000 members in your organization. What are you hearing from your constituents in the CCA? Has their patience about run out? I'm hearing a lot of people that would say, well, and I don't believe that the industry should go away, but certainly it needs to be with a balance where we continue to repopulate all the species without damaging it, but at the same time have an industry keep going. What is the feeling among your organization members?
Our guys are fed up. I mean, we see the science, we see the devastation, and something's got to give. We haven't even asked to put them out of business. We know how that would work, but we're just saying be responsible, be good stewards, move further away. This whole mileage from shore is not really about the miles. It's about the depth, as Chris talked about with purse seine nets. The deeper you go, the less bycatch, the less harm you do it. So it's pretty simple. But as far as the comments, yes, our guys are fed up. And the hard part for us is, this next round, obviously a lot of people that sent in those comments to Jonathan, who was, a great stand-up commissioner and willing to do what the people of Louisiana wanted, are going, well, it just fell on deaf ears. But I will tell your listeners, we're going to be calling on you to make those comments again. And frankly, you got to do it because we've got to be able to have that report to give Representative Joe Orgeron and all of our other friends on natural resources the ammo and the cover they need to take on this industry. And so it doesn't go unnoticed. Yes, as Joe said, the fix was kind of in, but we've got to go through the system, and sitting on our hands and being silent is not an option.
Well, you both will be involved, I'm sure, in the legislative process, and I don't know if you want to give away your game plan, Red, but as far as the CCA, what do you plan to go there armed with? Are you going to ask for go back to the original deal that they had made, get more restrictive than that, or actually give in and compromise on what they're asking?
So I can't give the exact details. Obviously, I've talked to a lot of legislators, and they are upset with this, too, because, frankly, they were handed a bad deal, and now they're reneging on it. And so what happens is now we're not starting the negotiation from a half a mile from the old NOI because, frankly, we weren't happy with it. So that's not the starting point. What is it? Look, CCA has been pushing for a mile buffer for years now. I think you need a total allowable catch on this industry. I think you need further protections on the passes. We might need to look at spawning seasons and off-limits areas and all kinds of things. And so I would fully expect some new legislation to be introduced. In what form or fashion is that going to be? Who knows at this point? The first thing we've got to deal with is oversight, as Joe said, and hopefully the House Natural Resources takes the bull by the horns and kicks it back to the commission.
You have to ask the question, why are the other states treated the way they do? I mean, where is the industry? Why have they had the door slammed in their face in Florida and Alabama, Mississippi moving them a full mile out, and Texas putting a limit on how much they can catch? And then, of course, as generous as we are, and yet they're coming back to the table again, they want more.
Look, I mean, I think that the answer is in the facts. I mean, all of those states realize that this industry are not good stewards of the resource, and frankly, they value the recreational fishing and tourism business as well as the other commercial industries. Look, these guys are feeding fish farms that are supplying shrimp that come back here and compete against our own fishermen. And so I think all these other states have realized this is just not a good practice, and they passed legislation to do it. They all did it for various reasons. And if you look along those arguments all the way up through the Gulf Coast as well as the East Coast, you will find a million reasons not to allow these guys to operate the way they are today in Louisiana.
All right, I got a lot of questions and comments coming in. We're going to address those when we come back from this break. If you've got a question or comment for Rad Trascher of Louisiana CCA or TRCP's Fisheries Director, Chris Macaluso, our number is 504-260-1870. It's our Oakland Heart Jewelers talk and text line, and we'll be right back after this traffic break.
WWL.com.
All right, with us are Rad Trascher, Executive Director of Louisiana Coastal Conservation Association, and Chris Macaluso, the Fisheries Director for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Guys, I got some questions from the listeners on our text message board for both of you. Chris, about the civil restitution, and Rad, someone wanting you to explain the oversight process. But before we get to those, I mentioned this earlier. The commission meeting is 7 unelected appointed commissioners serve. The vote was 3-3. It was a tie, 3 voting in favor of the NOI, 3 against it. The tie has to be broken by the chairman, and his vote went yes, so it went 4-3, and it passed. However, I have a copy of the ethics complaint that was filed with the state of Louisiana because 2 of the commissioners, that would be Kevin Segrera, who is the chairman, and Nathan Wall, who is also on the commission. He voted for it, and so did Segrera. However, both of those have interest in the alligator farming operations, which if the lower Menhaden cost, which this would bring about, reduces the feed cost, then that would improve their profitability within their industry. So there's an ethics concern, and there's a Louisiana statute that prohibits public officials from participating in matters in which they have a personal or a financial interest. Now, I don't know what's in Kevin Segrera and Nathan Wall's hearts. They both said that would not come into play. Maybe it doesn't. but certainly the perception is there that there is a conflict of interest, and I think they both should have abstained from voting, which would have killed it right there, and it would have been over with. So I just wanted to bring that up, and that's still in the balance. So if that comes through and their votes are negated, I don't know what's going to happen if anything goes on in the legislature. But with that in mind, Rad, I had a question, and someone wanted you to explain the oversight process.
So once the rule, the NOI will be published actually on Friday. That will open up a 30-day comment period. Once that comment period is closed, the Wildlife and Fisheries Department is tasked with gathering the comments and generating a report that goes to House and Senate Natural Resources. Either chairman can call for oversight because they disagree with the vote or not. And then that body will vote on whether to make any suggestions of change or just outright kick it back to the commission. And it basically resets the whole process and the schedule. Now, the kicker to that is no matter what that body does, being the House Natural Resources or Senate Natural Resources, the governor then is also allowed to either approve, let it sail by, or veto the oversight hearing. And obviously, depending on which way that goes, will determine what happens in the future on that NOI. Now, if oversight does nothing, it will revert back to the department, and the way the NOI is written, the secretary is basically told just to make it a rule. So, we're long from over, but that is why I say those comments are that important. Again, you're saying them to wildlife, but frankly, it will be relayed to the legislative body, and those guys need that support.
Very good. And that is a question someone posed. They want to know, is Governor Landry backing the Pogie Menhaden industry? I have invited him to come on and give his opinion on it, and I've got no response on it. Do either of you know where he stands on this issue?
I would say it's a safe conclusion to draw that, yes, he does support the industry here.
Rad, do you have any comment on it or any knowledge about what he's thinking with regard to the industry?
Look, he handed us the deal, a year and a half ago, and so obviously I have to assume he knows this NOI is in the process, and I would assume if they were going to break a governor's deal, he was aware and okay with it. But I haven't been told by the governor himself or anyone on staff that, we're behind this. But obviously, look, he's going to have a shot at it at some point, and so we'll find out.
We will find out. C-Mac, I got another question for you to handle, I think. This one says, if the bycatch is so small, why wouldn't they agree to pay restitution on such a small amount? I think the short answer is it ain't no small amount. What do you think? You have any calculations on what the restitution would be on the bycatch?
Don, we can go do the math. I do know that the restitution on redfish went up this past year in the legislature. I'd have to go back and look and see how many fish it is or how much money it is. But, the idea that this bycatch is small, it's more bycatch than if you took all of the other commercial fisheries in the Gulf and added them together. In fact, I would bet you that the bycatch in the Menhaden industry is larger than just about all the other commercial harvests combined. The industry sells it as a relatively low number. But let's think about this. They're allowed up to 5% bycatch. They're harvesting in excess of 800 million to 1 billion pounds of these fish a year, which means that their bycatch can be, 30, 40, 50 million pounds. We're talking literally 145, 150 million fish that they're not supposed to be killing, that they're killing on top of the menhaden that they're taking out. And again, I'll reiterate, that includes speckled trout, that includes redfish, that includes fish that are illegal for anybody else to capture and kill by those means. Those guys are doing that, and they're not being held to account for it.
Well, I've got figures that someone totaled up that would be the grand total of the bycatch, and this is not counting some of the other species, would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million. Because redfish are $50 a piece, speckled trout are $31.25, shrimp, and this is a very low, $1.50 a pound for 35 pound shrimp. And then when you look at some of the other species, the croaker, the mackerel, the flounder, the tarpon, I don't even have the numbers on that. So as he mentioned, Ben Landry said, if they had to pay the restitution that the rest of the world has to pay, they would be out of business. They couldn't afford to do it. They're destroying that much by bycatch.
Don, and it's also worth pointing out that no other boats get to do what those boats get to do. If oil, gas supply boats were in there making prop trenches along these surf zones in the way that the menhaden industry are, they would have to pay damages to wetlands. There's just a lot that this industry gets away with. And frankly, them trying to move them selling that deal to be at a half mile as a temporary arrangement and then trying to move within that area. And I don't say this lightly. That is just greed. It's greed and them flexing the political relationships and the muscle that they've built by the contributions that they've made to our politicians. It is simply greed. And it bears out if you look at the data. They're going to harvest 100 million pounds or more in 2025 than they did 2024. That harvest level will exceed several years that they've had in the last decade. They're making more money, and this is according to the federal government. They're making more money selling that product than they ever have before by $60 million a year. And they're bragging internally in their internal documents that we've gotten a hold of to their shareholders that they're making more money now in 2024 and 25 than they ever had on those products. The fact that they want to do more is simply greed by foreign companies at the expense of our natural resources here in this state.
I've just got a couple of minutes left. Your final comments on advice to our listeners. There's a lot of them that are agreeing with a lot of what you said and some that are opposed to it. If you support that industry the way it is or you oppose it, how people get involved in this? This is our process in this country.
Well, first is, once that is published, I think you need to, once again, send in your comments to Wildlife and Fisheries. You'll be able to find that on their website and obviously on mine and our emails. And I'm sure Chris and TRCP will be sending that out as well. I know it fell on deaf ears at the commission, but once again, you need to make those comments known. The other thing I would tell you is call your legislators now and tell them, I want this, I expect this, and we are going the wrong direction. Frankly, most of them are our friends and believe in what you do, but let them hear from you. Let them have the firepower that their constituents are concerned about this issue.
And let's hope that $782,000 donations to campaigns doesn't have too much of an effect. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, you've got to stay involved in the process, and I don't think that the comments fell on deaf ears. We had 3 commissioners who very rightly stood up for what the people of this state wanted and stood up for good conservation measures. And we've got a number of legislators who want to do the same. And support those guys. Let them know that just a little bit of common sense conservation here when it comes to, speckled trout, redfish, and other fisheries that have $1 billion or more annual impact on our economy and our culture. Recreational fishing is strong in this state, and all we're asking for with this buffer is to have a little bit of protection for the fish that support that more than $1 billion annual economic impact on our state.
Gentlemen, you both did a great job. We're out of time, unfortunately. Maybe we'll get to do this again, and I think we've provided a lot of information to a lot of people who knew nothing about this industry, and now at least they're aware of it. Appreciate you guys coming on.
Thanks for spreading the word, Don. We appreciate it.
All right, we'll be right back to wrap it up and find out what Newell Norman's got coming up for the next 3 hours right here on the Big 870 WWL.